I think some of my recent videos have gotten a little too serious and agenda-driven. So today I'm going to just make a quick, short video that is completely just for fun about something that doesn't matter at all. Anime! Weird cartoons from Japan. Specifically, that subgenre of anime which is all about the life and times of characters who are trapped inside of a fantasy-themed, massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Japan is huge, and there is an anime about almost anything you can imagine. And that specific premise has an entire subgenre dedicated to it, strangely enough, which includes the shows Dot Hack Sign, Sword Art Online, Log Horizon, and Axel World. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about my opinions on these shows. Dot Hack Sign was for many years my favorite anime of all time. I mainly loved the basic premise of the show. And secondarily, I loved the soundtrack. I think Dot Hack Sign has one of the best anime soundtracks ever. But on the other hand, Dot Hack Sign was not without its share of problems. The pacing of the show was, how do I put this, bad. Dot Hack Sign absolutely does not respect the viewer's time, with a great many scenes that could be totally deleted without losing very much of value at all, because they contain only dialogue that provides neither valuable plot exposition nor valuable character development. Every scene that contains a development in the plot of some kind that happens on Dot Hack Sign is then followed by an entire round, often an entire episode's worth of scenes in which every character in the show discusses that development with every other character on the show, so that we find out what every character on the show thinks about that development before the next development happens. And it's really too much information that doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't matter what characters think about some development that is going on, unless those thoughts motivate them to take some kind of action which affects the next development. And that isn't always happening in Dot Hack Sign. There's a lot of stuff that we just didn't need to know. I have never heard of a good writer who disputes the rule that any scene which does not drive the plot forward in some way should be deleted. And yes, this means deleting most of Naruto Shippuden. I'm reminded of that scene from the end of Kill Bill Volume 2, after the bride has just killed Bill with the 5-point palm exploding heart technique, and Bill is about to die, but he says, "No, you're not a bad person. You're a terrific person. You're my favorite person." That's how I feel when I say that Dot Hack Sign is a great show. It's one of my favorite shows, and it has terrible writing. Speaking of great shows with terrible writing, let's talk about Sword Art Online. Sword Art Online is essentially Dot Hack Sign again, except made 10 years later, with higher dramatic stakes, a more in-depth exploration of the same cool premise, and they've mostly fixed the pacing problem. The writing is still bad, but it's better than the writing in Dot Hack Sign was. So I think this series deserves better than a lot of the hate it's getting from anime critics. Some of these critics point out real problems with Sword Art Online, but there are also those that focus on game mechanics with a general tone of, "I play real MMOs and this game does it real." And it's some of that criticism that I'd actually like to try and refute. We didn't have this problem when Dot Hack Sign was coming out because it was 2002 and the internet was barely a thing for most viewers. We had EverQuest and RuneScape, but World of Warcraft was still 2 years away. There's a weird symmetry about all this because Dot Hack Sign came out 2 years before World of Warcraft came out, while Sword Art Online came out 2 years after the World of Warcraft active subscriber count peaked at 12 million in 2010. So Dot Hack Sign was informing people's expectations of what this sort of game could be, while Sword Art Online is being compared against these kinds of games as an everyday reality. When I first saw Dot Hack Sign, it felt futuristic. But when I first saw Sword Art Online, it felt nostalgic. I saw SAO in my late 20s, and I was thinking, hey, yeah, I remember that. That's the kind of stuff I used to imagine when I was in high school. Sword Art Online is basically what my sketchbooks from back then would have looked like if I could draw. So, based on that, I'm prepared to cut this show a lot of slack. And in SAO's defense, I am going to try and answer one of the biggest plot holes or problems people have with the plot. And that is the question, what makes Kirito so good at the game? This question is not adequately answered in the show itself. It's just not. And that is a problem with the show. However, I think there is a reasonable in-universe explanation which I think that all shows of this type depend on, whether it's Dot Hack Sign, or Sword Art Online, or Log Horizon, or Axel World, or even Mega Man NT Warrior. Any show like this which has characters interacting with a computer system directly through their brains, I think there is a reasonable in-universe explanation of why some people are better than others in a way that totally doesn't respect any kind of leveling or RPG battle system like you find in World of Warcraft. But before I can get to talking about that, I have to talk about the other two anime I've mentioned. The first is Log Horizon. I'm going to try and keep this real brief. Log Horizon is like Sword Art Online except with no dramatic stakes because nobody can die. And because nobody can die, the show is kind of boring. But it is trying to do some cool John Locke, Thomas Hobbes political theory stuff. And so the show is worth watching for people who are interested in economics and political theory and stuff. Just to see some of that in an anime was cool. But other than that, Log Horizon is nowhere near as cool as Sword Art Online. Now, on to Axel World. Axel World is a terrible anime about boring people having ridiculously over-emotional reactions to boring things happening. Axel World has some fight scenes that are okay, and I did like the villain in the second half. He really reminded me of Achille de Flandre from the Orson Scott Card Ender's Shadow series. And that's actually high praise for a villain. But getting to that requires watching all the episodes. And they are such a chore to slog through that I really can't recommend this anime at all. I'm not really rocking the boat with that opinion though, because most critics agree Axel World is pretty bad. However, there is one piece of exposition during the second half of Axel World that I think is really significant for anyone who didn't, like me, just intuit that this is how things work. And that is the Incarnate System. The Incarnate System in Axel World is basically a description of how all of these games, I posit, work in universe. The world from the Dot Hack series and Einkrad in Sword Art Online and Elder Tales in Log Horizon, they all work according to the Incarnate System, which is basically the computer doesn't just look at your levels and your stats when you do things in these games. It's also looking at your will. It is reading your consciousness and seeing how strong your will is. And then it is comparing the strength of your will against the will of your opponent. That's why you'll sometimes see things that would be impossible if we're just looking at levels and stats happen anyway. Because levels and stats and all that stuff is not what really decides the battles. So you'll have low-level characters sometimes being able to defeat high-level characters, and you'll have people coming back from the dead, and you will have a legendary player coming back after not playing for a long time, and yet they are still way stronger than anyone else. Yeah, that happens because level is not the only thing that actually determines victory or defeat. And by the way, I'm not just talking about APM either. If the computer is scanning someone's brain to actually get their muscle movements and stuff, then APM isn't even a thing in these games because they aren't holding a controller or a keyboard. It's directly reading their thoughts by scanning their brains, which is kind of, ridiculously sci-fi, but that's the premise, and you just have to suspend your disbelief for that premise. And if you can suspend your disbelief for that premise, then it is a much smaller suspension of disbelief to imagine that certain special individuals, like Kirito, have their brains wired in such a way that they have an incredibly strong will in the game. I imagine that in an early version, will is all that mattered to combat, and that levels and stats are just something that was added later in order to give the combat more of a tangible, understandable feel to people. So, that is how I imagine combat works in all of these series. Computers that can measure the strength of your will or your heart. Well, cornier things have happened. If you've seen the Matrix movies, then you know that Neo has all these amazing powers to manipulate the Matrix that other people don't have. But you may not realize that the reason why Neo has all these powers, the reason why Neo is the one, is because, and only because, Trinity loves him. Before the events of the film, the Oracle gives a prophecy to Morpheus, which says that he will find the one, and the one will be Trinity's true love. So, before the beginning of the Matrix films, Morpheus is searching the Matrix to find the one, and this means he's searching the Matrix to find Trinity's true love. And so, yeah, Neo is the one because of the power of love, and that's canon. Deal with it. So, if things like that can happen in beloved science fiction franchises, then this explanation of the Incarnate System for why Sword Art Online and Dot Hack Sign and Log Horizon and Axel World are all the way that they are really can go a long way and explain a whole lot. And I just don't understand why people didn't just figure that this must be how it works, because it just seems to be an assumption that permeates all of these series. So, what did you all think about my first video talking about anime? Would you like to hear me bash Axel World some more? Or talk about why Steins Gate is so cool? Or anything else? Or does my audience not care about anime? Let's find out. Of course, I don't imagine that any video with Sword Art Online in the title is going to have no views.